Good afternoon. The European Payment Council is welcoming attendees for this webinar focusing on the SEPA Request-To-Pay scheme. This webinar aims to provide valuable insights into the new use cases and scenarios they enable merchants and into the business motivations driving the participation in this scheme. You will be able to ask questions for this seminar in written during the whole seminar. So please try to give the question as soon as you have them, because there will be a delay and we have to sort them out, of course. So don't wait for the moments where we have questions in this seminar. Then the program is as follows. I'm doing a small introduction. We will have Gareth giving us the current market demand growth. Then I will explain the role of the EPC and how EPC is applying to this demand, presenting the SRTP scheme. There will be some questions, then a Q&A session of about 15 minutes. And then we will hear answer for new cases and business scenarios that SRTP would enable for merchants. And the next speaker will be Xavier, that will explain why CaixaBank has decided to join the scheme. And if there are some more questions, at the end we will, of course, review all the questions. So a brief presentation of all the panelists. Well, I will begin with myself, as I'm not here as BNP Paribas, although my title might indicate. I'm here as the chair of this task force, this SRTP task force with the EPC. I've been at the BNP Paribas since 1998, so that's now 35 years. I'm graduated for l'École Centrale de Paris, and then started at Alcatel, and I have done something like 25 years in IT, and now 10 years in payments. So our panelists, as you see, and as the EPC is doing all the time, it's quite balanced, because we have what we call demand and offer, and service also. So we have Gareth. Gareth, you are a principal analyst at the research and advisory firm Celent, so representing services based in London. And you have global coverage of this topic relating to wires, ACH, instant payments, SWIFT, you name it. And of course, you are interested with our new technology, which is SRTP, or technologies used to process these payments. Then we have Atse. Atse, you are a payment advisor at the Eurocommerce and an independent speaker and consultant. You have a degree in business economics, and you have worked for 30 years for BP. You are Dutch, and you play golf and speak several languages. So welcome here. And next we have Xavier. So Xavier, you are managing operation groups at Caixa, more than 30 years working in the banking sector. You have dedicated the last 15 to payment sector, and currently you are working with us at the EPC task force on the Request-To-Pay, representing the Spanish community, and involved on several internal projects at Caixa and external community to deploy the use cases based on the Request-To-Pay. So I thank you everyone for this being there at this panel. And I guess we can start with the first presentation, which is the presentation from Gareth. So Gareth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me on this panel. And thank you everybody for joining us today. So as you just heard, I work for the research and advisory firm Celent. And just a little bit of context about what we do, because that explains the tack I'm going to take with my few slides. We are a global research and advisory firm helping banks make the right technological purchasing decisions. So we scan the market and work out what's happening, what's important, and the timelines that are happening. We help then translate that into strategic priorities, and then what that means in terms of technology initiatives. And so Request-To-Pay, or RTP as we typically call it, has been something we've been talking to banks and non-banks all around the world for at least 8 or 9 years now, although we've not always called it RTP. And I think that's part of the question. And in those discussions, we have many of the same kind of starting points, if you'd like. We talk about some of the same things, because I think there's some inbuilt assumptions from many of the providers. And one of those is that RTP is brand new because it's new in that market, and they're not quite sure whether it's really going to take place. So we've had a variation of this particular slide for many years. I think this one now is 3 or 4 years old, and that's almost partly the point. You know, it's 3 or 4 years old. This is not new. This is what we've been talking to banks in many markets around the world. We're talking about this in the US, for example. And so what I'd like you to do is take away perhaps a few things from this slide. First of all, it's not science fiction. You know, RTP in some shape or form is happening widely across the world already today. Second, at the point of sale, it is already most definitely happening. So what you see here is a picture from a small merchant in Hong Kong. And you can see a couple of things. First of all, it's got a QR code. So many of the RTP schemes we see around the world are using QR codes, whether national ones or dynamic ones issued by a particular vendor, etc. But that's part and parcel of it often. It doesn't have to be, but it, for the consumer's experience, is often the most widely understood and easiest to adopt. Second, you see across the bottom a choice of payment types. FPS is the Hong Kong's real-time network. Tap and Go is their mobile wallet, and Octopus, of course, is their mass transit card. What you don't see is a card terminal, let alone any card brands on this. And so what we're saying here is actually it really is bypassing the card networks and providing a very different experience for that customer. I think what's also particularly interesting about this slide is this was offered by, I believe it was Alipay, but Tencent are doing something similar. So non-banks are already in market and are members of the real-time networks in Hong Kong to bypass the card networks. And though banks in Hong Kong are saying they're seeing a marked impact on their revenue from both issuing and acquiring because of the uptake on this. The other piece to think about here is that for the consumer, you don't have to get a card out. Everybody always has their phone in their hand. But for the merchant, they're getting more than what they're getting from the cards. Not only is it cheaper, but that dynamic QR code is giving them ability to offer offers. The first 10 people get X% off, etc. But also they're getting all the benefits from instant payments as well. So it's a well-rounded offering designed for the merchant. And so it's the merchant who are really driving this take-up in many ways. The consumers love the experience, but without the merchants on board, it probably wouldn't have got that far. Next slide, please. If we look closer to home, actually, we see similar examples already in place. Vits in Norway, Swish in Sweden, that's the logo for the SIBS experience. And there are many other examples in Ideal, in the Netherlands, and with Six in Switzerland, etc. So it's very clear that there is not only demand, but also take up of that demand as well. My wife is Norwegian, so we're often in Norway, and it's very difficult to pay a small merchant not using VIPs. Same with Swish. That's very difficult not to use if you're in Sweden. But that perhaps demonstrates why we need the SEPA RTP scheme, because as a non-Norwegian, I can't get a Norwegian bank account very easily, and therefore I can't use VIPs, and I can't use Swish, and I can't use SIBS when I go to Portugal. And not only that, they are very tailored to a specific use case. So I think it shows that both there is a demand there, but there are also a good gap in that market for something like SEPA RTP to play a role, which is why we're very bullish in talking to both our supply side of our business, so all the vendors, but also the banks about the business case, about how to make the most of this. And actually, there is a business case behind it. Next slide, please. So this slide is where I'm going to spend most of my time as a kind of a teeing up to the rest of that discussion. Because one of the things, if you're one of my clients or heard me speak before, you will know I say, don't reinvent the wheel. If there are learnings to be had, look at them, understand how they apply to you. Not everything will perfectly fit, but there's enough clues there that say, this is a shortcut to success. So I've summarized them in 4 broad bullets. To be fair, we could spend several hours just talking about all the other kind of learnings and the nuances, but I think these 4 would get us quite a long way. The first one is the obvious one, reach and availability. Payments is a two-sided market, and that means both sides have to be ready. And so with the upcoming registration about SEPA Inst, we will start to get much more traction and that availability. If you look at places like the US, for example, they've got their own RTP system called RFP, confusingly, and they are already running RFP out there at the moment. But their challenge is, despite a successful pilot between BNY and Verizon, the big mobile operator, is they can't go much further because there are only one other bank in the marketplace that is sufficiently ready as they are. So limiting all the options. And that's just not just request to pay, but the SEPA Inst or their equivalent behind that. But more than that, we need a common experience because when something is new, it's a learning curve. And so if you go to a different provider each time and it's a slightly different experience, unless there is a good reason for that, that's confusing. And so you want to make it as easy as possible for all the parties involved to understand the why they should change, how it works, what isn't right, because that's tackle that fraud part. That's where often fraud takes place, is when people aren't familiar with that experience and getting it right. So the clear messaging and positioning will be key to all of this. Now, we'll come back to that a little bit in the final point, because there is a balance between SEPA RTP and the using it as a tool versus some of the packages that we would expect to see in the marketplace, and how you balance those two experiences. The second part is the scheme is going to be the starting point, not the end point. And this has 2 strands to it. The first is the scheme as it stands today won't stop here. It's going to evolve over time. It's more than the minimum viable product, but there are going to be all sorts of things we can't even necessarily imagine coming down the line in the future. So when you're starting to design your product and the proposition, thinking about all the other things that might happen down the line and building those possibilities helps to avoid that rebuilding and restarting each time, and looking forward to how you can enhance going forward. That's the same with any new proposition, but it's worthwhile stating here because I think the market is going to develop quite quickly. The second point is more that the scheme is a tool. It doesn't mean that you can't make other things with that tool, adding things in the process, around the process, to add even more value to that customer. So if we look at one of the more successful service vendors on this side, someone like Bankify, for example, they spent an awful lot of time working with SMEs to understand how an SME would use this, what would they value. And so they've added APIs to link to cash management products and virtual accounting products. They've broken down the steps so they can add extra elements into it because they recognize that the value to the SME is not making the payment, but the automation of the process. The less time they spend doing the admin, the more time they do selling, that's where the real benefit is to them. The third part is slightly tongue-in-cheek because as an analyst, I get presented by banks and fintechs all around the world talking about their latest innovations and really pitching me why it's great and where it's going. And to be honest, nearly every single one seems to think they can make world peace and solve world hunger. So great is their solution. And therefore, when actually goes to market and there's that expectation gap, that's where some of the issues start to appear. So I think it's about setting the right expectations going forward. Now, we have a rough rule of thumb that says no new payment type, and I know this isn't a payment type, it's a payment initiation type, has ever got more than 10% market share in under a decade. Now, there are potentially one or two exceptions. UPI in India might be one of those, but it's not at 10% now, even at 50 billion transactions a year. But who wouldn't want Swish's traction or VIP's or UPI's traction? So 10% actually is a very good sum. So I think it's understanding that positioning about what is a realistic expectation of a market share and what might that lead to further down the line. It's going to be a very valuable tool that I think every bank is going to offer ultimately, and non-banks as well. We're at that beginning of that curve. So here the business case is not so much about where it will be in 5 years' time and ROIs. It's about that learning experience and getting ahead of the market, because we see in pretty much every market where there's RTP, but also value adds around instant payment schemes, the early adopters are the ones who benefit the most. So it's that learning experience and getting the foot in the door. We're not going to be billionaires on day one, but it lays that foundation for everything that follows. So wrapping all of those elements together, I think it's about positioning it in the right way for the right use cases. It's not going to replace all of SEPA direct debit, for example, or all of cards. It's going to work alongside. But for certain use cases where it's a variable payment each month or it's ad hoc, it has a very strong proposition. For the SME market or for the point of sale market, again, it has strong propositions for when you start to build the things around it, that broader proposition, not just the RTP scheme that's underpinning it. So then it starts to become a question of, let's make sure we focus on the benefits for the customer first and less about the bank and maybe the bank last. And we say that because so many business cases that we've seen around this are looking for an ROI just around the RTP piece or just around instant payments. But as we've said to many clients in many countries, an instant payment is only as instant as the time you know you've got it, who it's from, and can reconcile it. And to do that, you need real-time data. You can offer the real-time reconciliation services. You need a real-time data feed. All these additional revenue sources around it are what to start to make the difference. And so RTP could be that sprat to catch the mackerel, as it were, and provide a deeper, richer experience. We also think in the early days, getting that right experience right, it is going to be actually a way to retain customers and attract new customers. It might be a loss leader. It might make revenue, but it might be a loss leader because it's part of that broader relationship. Back to transaction banking contracts as a whole, it's often that payments is the place where the price is negotiated. This is the same kind of ideal. It's part of that process. I think fundamentally, though, you're going to need to start to understand the margins of the different payment types and what it means for you. So you can start understanding where you should be focusing, moving low margin payments to higher margin businesses like RTP, for example. But that's a separate conversation for a separate webinar. So to summarize, I think we're very bullish about the possibilities for SEPA RTP. We think it's here for the long term and plays a very valuable role. We're actively telling our clients, whilst it's early days, they should be adopting and experimenting, understanding how this works, because we think the people who are in the vanguard of this are the ones who are going to shape the expectations and how it's going to be used going forward. And I think this is the start of that journey, certainly not the end of that journey. So that's all I was planning to say. Back to you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gareth. I'm always amazed that people in the market understand so well the scheme when they are not directly in the task force. So really, thank you for all you've said. There's nothing wrong, absolutely, and it's very impressive. So thank you, and you were in time also, so thank you for that. We move to the presentation of the scheme itself, the SRTP payment scheme. So there was one question, I'm reading it out loud now, so don't hesitate if you have other questions. I will cover this question during the presentation, you will see. The question was, can RTP work along with SCT for payment, or will always need STT ints for RTP to work? So I will cover that. You will see the answer is quite easy. The presentation. So we have the agenda. If we can move to the agenda. So yes, so the scope and business value proposition. So that's the introduction of what is the SRTP, how we made that, what is it. Then we will give some sample use cases on where it can be used and what for you can use it. Of course, it's just examples. You can have many more. And then we will give some key characteristics of this scheme to try to explain why it's there and what it brings, and explain the next steps, because as Gareth was saying, that's only the beginning. As we show now to the market that we have made sort of a pause because it was needed since we are version 3, and we did a lot of work to come to version 3, but now we are stable, as the title of the presentation indicate. So that's a gesture to the market to say now it's stable, but it's a stable first version. There are going to be more, of course, when the market needs it. Okay, so we can move to the scope and business value proposition. So that is the official drawing you will find on the EPC website, explaining what is the scope of SRTP. So it covers a set of operational rules and technical elements, including messages, etc., between the service providers, in fact. And we insist on the fact that the SRTP is a messaging functionality, is not a payment mean, and not a payment instrument, it's just the messaging. And the underlying transaction, among other, can be based on SCT or SCT. So the answer is here, and we will explain with more use cases when the SCT is relevant and you don't need SCTs all the time. So if you go to the next slide, that is a slide with no words, because I wanted to explain one of the prominent questions we have in frequently asked questions. You know, there's 10 questions that we have the most, and this question we have the most is, can you explain why it's not a payment scheme? Well, it's not a payment scheme, and what does it do? As everything you put in a computer, you computerize what already happened in current life. So what happened in current life here, you're at the merchant by purchasing apples or whatever you like, and the merchant tells you, well, you owe me €9.55. That's a request to pay, in fact, because I'm requesting you to pay this amount. And then you might reply, I imagine in France, but in other countries something different. Do you accept checks? And then no, I don't accept checks, and I don't accept card under €10. And there is a dialogue like that with the payee and the payer, explaining what you owe, if you owe it immediately, if you can pay later, because sometimes you go to a merchant, and they just wrote in a notebook. That in small villages we had that. You wrote in the notebook, oh, you owe me that, and at the end of the month you pay. So there is different arrangement, and there is a sort of dialogue here. And what SRTP is doing before the payment is just normalizing this dialogue to say, okay, you owe me this amount. That is how I would like to be paid. That's a merchant saying that. And then that goes to the payer, and the payer looks at that and says, okay, I have different ways to pay, different delays depending on the use case. And the payer can choose what he would like to pay. And then that is the phase you have before the payment. And the phase you have after the payment would be the reconciliation. Because at some point, the merchant has several customers. On B2B, of course, the business has several business as a customer. And when you receive the payment, you want to know who has paid you. For business to say, okay, this company has paid me, and for a consumer to deliver the goods, of course. So SRTP is not doing the central phase, which is the payment. And as Gareth was explaining, let's not reinvent what already exists. We have SCT, we have SCT-ins. We might add other payments in the flow when they come. They are there. We're not reinventing them. We just normalize the message that are around, so that you can do that. And that's the main idea of SRTP. Okay, and that's why it's not a payment scheme. It is what is around. And we always say, well, there should be a payment in the middle, but of course you also have the option to say no, finally I don't want to pay that. It's too expensive. So there might be no payment at all at some point. So we don't look at the payment, we look at what's around, and that's important to understand that. So now the scope on the next slide. So it's a new way to request a payment initiation. In fact, it's a normalization of the message you send to say say that. The payee initiates the request to pay, transmits all the criteria he has in mind for this payment. All he wants, if he wants if he prefers SCT-ins, if he wants to be paid immediately or later. So then the benefit of that is it is credit transfer agnostic, because in fact today we have SCT-ins and high value payments. You can also have other types of credit transfer. It's channel agnostic because you transmit the message however you like, from end user from the payer to the payee. It's use case agnostic. You can invent as many use cases, and it's business segment agnostic. Even if it started after EIPP, which is a B2B invoicing system. When we did invoicing system, we thought that there was this request to pay missing, and so we did it for the B2B. But of course, it applies to many use cases. So you can go on the next page, and it's based on the classic model. We know the four corner models, and what we do here in the SRTP is the lower part, which is between the service providers, which is between the request to pay service provider of the payee and on the payer. There is an exchange of message, and that's what we do here. Of course, we have some ways to go around, but you have to think always that the EPC wants to. There is a remit of the EPC, and of course we don't go into the commercial field. We don't go into competition field. We want to let competition happen, and of course what happened between the payee and the payer is for the market to invent and give the solution that work. So at the moment, for example, we don't go up to defining what is in the QR code or whatever, because that is customer journey. There are other groups that do it, MSCT at the EPC, and that try to normalize it. But that's since we don't want to reinvent it, we let this group do that, and of course we let the market do this part that we don't do. And what we normalize is the exchange between the providers. Okay, so that's mainly the four corner model explanation. So on some sample use cases. So, for example, invoicing, because that's where it started. So the use case is a supplier presents a SRTP to a business customer. The delivers of goods is decoupled from the presentation, because usually B2B relationship, you trust the other one. So you have sent the invoice, but not only sending the invoice, you send it in a request to pay. And what you can do in the request to pay is put the invoice as an attachment, and then you send it, and it helps automate the process. On the other hand, the payer is receiving it, is looking whether he's received the good, is satisfied with the service if it's a service, and he might say, yes, I accept to pay. So saying yes, I accept to pay in a request to pay doesn't mean you are going to pay, but it's already an indication that someone on the payer side acknowledge he has received something, some good, and it can have also a value for the payee if you think about factoring or other things that are, of course, out of scope of our business here. It's just the messaging part, but you can think of how you can use that. So for the supplier, it's fast, it's digital process, and of course, what's essential is it simplifies reconciliation, because what we have done, you, as a payee, you put a reference in the request to pay, and this reference is copied down to the SCT or SCT-ins. So if you receive a SCT or SCT-ins, you look at your bank account on the payee side, and you will see this same reference. So the reconciliation should be 99% or more. And of course, for the payer, there is a flexibility, because you will give some payments delay. You will set the date for payment and for how long you can do that. So that's a good advantage for them. So next use case would be a subscription payment. That is a new one, version 3, which is for the installment. So customer wishing to pay a good in several times, you can make the installment. You can agree with a merchant what are the installments, and send it as a request to pay with the old installments. So you can think BNPL, whatever you like behind that. Of course, we're not doing BNPL. We let, as always, the market do it. But we can express that in a SRTP language to say that's how I would like to be paid with this kind of several payments. So of course, for the customer, that here is a PSU, is flexibility, better service, and for the merchant, you have an entirely digital process, and you can express this kind of payment that is quite fashionable at the moment to be paid like that. And the other one would be at the point of interaction. So of course, it also works at the point of interaction, which is in the shop immediately. Here you will have to think about what is the dialogue between the merchant and the consumer. We didn't normalize it, as I explained, because there is a limit to what the EPC is doing, and we don't want to interfere with the market. But then once you have this dialogue, you can use the request to pay as a flow to have the payment. And what happens here, the request to pay has in mind something that is different from the payment we have today, where the merchant is pulling the payer to the payment. Here, of course, you need some kind of smartphone or some kind of equipment. But what happens is the payer receives the payment on his device, and is paying on his device, not on the device of the merchant. So it's more secure because it's his device, has been secured by the request to pay a service provider that it has chosen. And it's also securing a lot of things I will explain. So that's a very good use case that works, but there is some work from the market to be done to make it work, of course, in practical life, and we let you do this work. So the next one, the value proposition for the various stakeholders. So you've seen it's a flexible support for a lot of use cases and business scenarios. A possible alternative for SDD, that is, it already happens for SDD that there are customers that don't like it, simply and plainly. And it's also happened when you have a failed SDD because there was no funds and you want to do it again. So the SRTP is an alternative to that. And in this case, you understand very easily that you don't need a CT-INS, because if I send you a request to pay your telephone bill, you have 2 weeks. So it's useless to do a CT-INS. If you pay next week, you can do a normal SCT and it will work within the delay. So it supports invoicing because with contextual payment, I already explained that. Can be used in install, of course. Simplify reconciliation and enhance security for account to account. What is essential, and you see sort of lot of regulation around that. For example, confirmation of payee. I don't like this confirmation of pay thing, because when you pay with card, for example, to your pharmacy, do you ask yourself, is the money going to the pharmacy? No, you don't. And do the pharmacian ask, am I going to receive the money? No, they don't. If the bank made an error, it's a problem of the bank, and the pharmacy will receive the money, and the payer knows that he's paid the right person. So that's what we do in request to pay, because we have at the enrollment of the payee the necessity to check their IBAN, and that's of course essential for the role. So it eliminates the need to do confirmation of payee here, although it will be mandatory by law, but it, of course, we will do it if it's mandatory by law, but we have it already in request to pay, so it secures the payment. The activation process also, I won't explain it because it's long, secures it, as you can do whitelist, blacklist, for example. Today there are pay by link that is becomes popular, but then the link here will be verified by your request to pay service provider, so they will be secured. And as I already explained, the payer is using his own device, so he has no trouble with a device that could be compromised at the payee side. Of course, he has to keep his device safe. So that's all the security are put around. There is a default API for fast time to market, and it's deployable on all SEPA scheme countries, of course, with the other currencies that you can use in the request to pay. So let's move to the characteristics. It is based to ISO 20022. So which version? We have a question. Which version of the ISO 20022 standard are we using? We are using the last one, so probably the one from 2019 or later, because of course we use the last version. So that's of course. And the other question, I'm addressing them because I already said that, but we could have more answer about that. Do you think SRTP will enhance and help developing of digital wallets? As I explained you, the mindset of request to pay, at least for consumers, is that you pay from your device. So from your device, it means you have a website or wallet or whatever you call it, and you receive it in your own environment. So of course you will need that, and it will enhance it, and these wallets might use that or not, as long as they want. So as of November 30th November this year, the use of EPC default SRTP API will become mandatory. So of course that's when it enters into force. Already said, fully decoupled from other payment, processing exchange data, of course in line with GDPR, and is open to any party capable of fulfilling relevant eligibility requirement. That's important because it's not only open to banks or PSP. You can be a merchant and directly send the SRTP. Of course, you need to be homologated. That's why we have homologation in this scheme, to be sure that there is security all around. And of course, the participation to SRTP is optional. So the features we have in it. So the features, I already said, the main features in immediate or later payment. There is a payment certainty, so that you can use that. Although the scheme is not providing itself, it is a request for payment certainty, and you have to have another scheme giving the certainty. You could use, for example, SCT with payment certainty instead of SCT. That is another way of doing things. You encapsulate the invoice with SRTP, flexibility for the payers, and of course, from the start, accept now, pay now, accept now, pay later, accept later, pay later. cancellation, payment instrument choice, credit note, I let you read all that. All that is in version 3, and that's a wonderful thing. And now the homologation, because I'm a bit quicker because I was a bit long, but I covered some questions, so we could have some time for the question. So we have an homologation. That is because I explained it's open to non-PSP. So the homologation, there is a standard homologation for everyone. It's simplified if you're a PSP because you already have an agreement from an NCA. Another simplified for RTSP. RTSP, what is it? It is, we believe that they are the technical providers in the middle can help with the scheme. We call them technical providers. It could be your CSM that was doing payment or someone else that's having this role. And of course, if you use a technical a reference technical solution provider, your homologation will be even simpler because this reference technical solution will do something for you, and we know it does it correctly. So it simplifies the homologation. Okay, so we can move to the next page. So now the next steps. Of course, we are version 3. What we did in version 3 was enrollment activation process, which is essential. The redirection option, installments, already explained, request for payment initiation status, that is after the payment. You could ask if you don't have it directly from the scheme, the initiation status, and possibility to send credit note, and a reference to a previous SRTP to link several payments. And version 3.1 with minor upgrades, I won't enter into details there. And then I think it's the last one because I won't go into the annex. I guess they will be sent to you. So now the next thing, we have published a clarification paper and the RMA, which is not published, which is just for the participants. And then the launch of the homologation. No major release is scheduled as of now, as I explained, because we want to give stability to the market. And we will now follow a two-year cycle for this stability, and we might have a new version next year with change requests we will have. So that is about the presentation. So now I think we can go on the first Q&A session. I have a question: are there any special requirements on top of the one needed for being participants? So for being a participant, that's rather an EPC question, because for being participant, you have an adhesion guide that you can read, and there's no special thing because it's open to also non-PSP. Of course, you have to go through the homologation, but that's all explained in the adherence guideline, in fact. You give example of use cases where the payer at the PSP may be a non-PSP PASP entity. Do someone want to cover it?
Sure, and I think you covered a lot of ground for me already, so thank you for that. So I could see, when a merchant uses an app for, ordering, it could incorporate a SRTP functionality to request a payment from the consumer who is doing that mobile order, so to say.
Mm-hmm. So that would be yeah. But I guess the question, reading it again, it's on the payer side, because you offer service on the payer side. So of course, I guess it could be also the interest of the merchant to have the payer onboarded, so that you can do some, I don't know, loyalty or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay. So you would be a non-PSP, but you might have agreement with PASP or anyone. And that's a possibility here, of course, it's open. So the next question is, will there be interoperability outside of SEPA countries in the future? So that's, I think, not the remit of the EPC, although you might be thinking of city-ins. So I don't know if they might be that, but every idea you have, you can do a change request. That's how it works. And of course, does SRTP cover cross-border use cases? Obviously, because we have multi-currency in the SRTP. I think we have had that since version 2 of this, but it's there anyway inside. So the next question is, you say that activation process is mandatory, but the suggested message schema not. What way activation do you see as possible between payee and payer? So yes, so activation, so it's a bit tricky, and I didn't explain that because the explanation would be long and would be outside of the time frame. The activation is a mandatory process, but you are not mandated to use what we put in the scheme to do that. Activation it is just for for GDPR if you're a natural person, so that the natural person has agreed to receive your request to pay, and it's not harassment. He has agreed to receive that, but we make it simple because you realize that if you pay in the shop with your card and you swipe it, that's a gesture, and this gesture means you want to pay. So if you do with SRTP and you just flash a QR code or show your QR code, it means you want to pay, and it means activation. So it's by default activation, and it doesn't need to be a real process that you will see, etc. It can be very transparent. And of course, activation, the real one, is needed if you go in use cases like paying your phone bill, because at some point the merchant, the telephone company here, will need your kind of email address, which is we call SRTP address, to send you the SRTP, so that you have this amount of time to pay. So the activation in itself is mandatory, also to be safe on the GDPR side. But you can use whatever you like, and can even be implicit. Which standard will be applied for the API? So the API, it's not Berlin Group, it's an API that is translated from the IG, because EPC is doing IG, which means implementation guidelines, and there are in ISO 20022 XML. And from that, we have a tool that translates it to JSON. It makes an API. So it is a bit, it's not a pure API as you would have made it from scratch, but it works, and it's also compatible with the CSM rail you might have that uses this XML. So that's what we have here. And of course, what we say with this API, it's a default API. You can use whatever you like. And that's the thing we have in version 3.1, which was a decision from the board. The only thing, if you use whatever API you like to talk with the other one, is when you talk to someone that doesn't use your API, you have to use the EPC default API unless agreed differently with the other one, of course. So somehow, if you are in a country that already uses some kind of RTP, you can continue to do that, adhere to the scheme. And for cross-border, that's what Gareth was explaining, not being able to pay with Swish. So that's how we know. I don't know how we know so well the scheme. Of course, you can use this default API to say, okay, I translate my own RTP to Swish. And then you go through EPC, and then on the other hand, they take EPC API and they translate it to Swish, and hopefully it works. Okay, so how does the SRTP scheme avoid fraudulent payees entering into the service? So I don't know who wants to say maybe a bank. Xavier, you want to address that? How?
Yeah, well, obviously, when you accept somebody to send a request to pay, you have to know who is sending it. And you have to rely on them, you have to do your proper KYC, you have to, in our case, we will ask them, we require them to sign some kind of document in which it's clearly stated what they are doing, but obviously it's a question of security, as we do on internet services. It's not going to be different. We are not going to allow somebody to send a request to pay to somebody without our prior investigation of who he is, without the proper KYC, and whatever, just with direct debits or whatever service we provide through our internet services, because we are not thinking about providing request to pay on a physical space. We just think it as to be provided by means of internet banking.
Okay. Yes, and of course there is also a way to monitor for the yes/no response to the SRTP, because when you present a request to pay to a payer, the payer might say no. And of course, if it's fraudulent, because we have thought about that, someone sending spams for a request to pay, even if it's not a payment, it could trigger payments. But if you see a lot of no, because there might be maybe 1 or 2% that fall into it and pay. But if you see that 95% start to say no, it might trigger some kind of alert saying, what is that? What is happening here? So it's, I guess it would be, and even if you go through RTSP, the RTSP, which is the reference technical solution provider in the middle, will see all this no and say, oh, that's something happening here, that maybe there's an alert that something doesn't go quite well. So that's an idea to avoid these fraudulent pages. But of course, as Carles was also saying, we're not solving the world hunger, and there will always be fraud attempt at least. And we have another question, which is, what is the use case for the functionality request for credit notes? Our request for credit notes. So I don't know if someone wants to take that. I can cover it. So request from credit note is started from the B2B world. The example would be that you have a service that you send someone will work for 30 days, and you send the bill for 30 days, and in fact the person has worked for 29. So either you want a new bill, or you say, okay, I just send you a credit note for 1 day, and on the next month with the service, if the service is going on, you will subtract this credit note from the next bill. Of course, if you don't have any more business flow with the same company, at the end you will have to refund the credit note. But usually, what we do with credit notes is we put it with another request to pay, and then you do the sum of what we have to pay and you subtract the credit notes, and that's what we really have to pay. E-procurement platforms of big companies buying products and services. Or something like Amazon Pay replacing the card file approach, their offer to non-Amazon websites merchants. Well, of course, Amazon is free to adhere to request to pay as even as non-PSP. What is good here is, and we also have a frequently placed question, is what is the identifier of someone in SRTP? So the identifier is a bit like an email. You have two parts. You have your request to pay service provider, like you have in an email, like @gmail.com. That's your provider. And you have a first part, which is something that was given by your provider. And the two parts made the complete address of the SRTP. So of course, you can when you do a QR code or something, you can give. Since it's a machine speaking to a machine, you can give an alias, you can give a code token. If you think of email, you have throwaway email, the one-time email, you can give a one-time email. And if you go to a shop for SRTP, you can give to Amazon an alias, which is difference I make with a token and an alias is a token, it will change every time, and an alias, you give always the same to the same merchant, but if you go to another merchant, you give another alias. So if you give an alias, it's better than card or file, because you can throw it away if you don't want it. You cancel the activation, which is a process called deactivation, and then the alias doesn't work anymore. So that's better than card on file, and the Amazon or whoever else will be able to send you a SRTP with this alias, always the same, it doesn't change. And it's a different one for another person. So that could be a way here. Standing order, imaginable for future. Could be a change request to be submitted. Standing order, we already, we have installment, but it's not infinite. So standing order could be a change request, yes, probably. And the US RFP scheme puts a very high level requirement on validation on the companies using default or fraud falling on the sponsor. So that's a question for you, Gareth, because you know this US scheme better than us.
Indeed, it was a reference to the earlier part about the trust and onboarding of other organisations. I think there's a lot of concern about fraud, but I think that can be addressed in part through the scheme rules and is done in a number of other countries. The US Request-To-Pay scheme puts very high standards on any corporate joining the scheme, and in effect, the sponsor is the underwriter for them if there is any fraud. So they've really tried to balance the rolling out of the scheme, getting people of interest, but getting it right the first time round. So there's a lot of work done with people like Verizon, for example, about checking who is going to, are they real accounts, who's going to check them, etc., etc.
Yeah, and that's where we are different because, as I explained, we are just the messaging scheme. So you cannot charge a postman with refunding things. The postman responsibility is to deliver the package, and that's it. And the only responsibility to carry as an SRTP is to deliver correctly the package. And how you enroll, and that's the limit of the EPC remit. How you enroll the payee or the payer stays a commercial and private relationship. So that's maybe where we differ with, if you agree on that.
Difference between scheme and operator.
Yeah, because we do not include the payment part, so it's different here. We can move on the new use cases and business scenarios. Atsé, if you would like to take the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to join the webinar to bring in the voice of reality from the merchant's perspective, so to say. I think, next slide, please, that Alain, you gave already a quite good introduction of myself. So I'm not going to go over the left side of the slide here, but maybe a few words around Eurocommerce. So Eurocommerce is the leading trade federation for retail and wholesale. It covers around 50% of the members are big global players in the furniture, supermarket, fashion industries, and other half are national associations representing a lot of the SMEs. So around 5 million companies are represented, and 90% of them are SMEs. It's omni-channel, so both in-store and online activities. And last but not least, there is the social partner, the job and skills element that Eurocommerce represents. Now, Eurocommerce historically has been quite active in payments, through different dossiers, IFR being one of them, which, I've now taken over. And maybe going to the next slide, just wanted to point out that we've created a coalition on the merchant side together with other merchant organizations. So I'm not just here talking, on behalf of retail, but we have in the back those other merchant organizations as well. So moving on then, please. I'm not going to go through all the detail of this slide, but I want to make the point here that, many cases I get the statement to me, you're only interested in cost and fees and things like that. And I say, no, it's the balance between customer experience and cost. You can have a great customer experience, but it's costing an arm and a leg. That will not work for us and for our customers. And the other one will not work either, a lousy customer experience, but, very low cost. So it's finding that balance, and that's what's making, retail payments so interesting. So moving on then. I've tried to bring some, benefits. I think, Alain, you covered already quite a few of them, so I'm not going to go maybe in all of the detail. So the first point I would make is that, this leverages SCT Inst, with a different fee structure than card fees. Card fees that we have seen increasing, maybe not on the interchange part, but definitely on the scheme part. So there is something of interest for merchants. It's ready for a wide adoption, and I really like the point made earlier that it is available throughout the SEPA region, so also in the cross-border within SEPA use cases. I think that's a big benefit. If a Polish person wants to order wine directly from a French winery today, that is
I think we lost you. Or is it me?
It's pressing the wrong button, maybe. Is it better now?
Okay, yeah, it's better. Okay, thank you. You got
where I mentioned the fast execution and the guaranteed payment. I think we already talked about it. Especially leveraging SCT Inst, the fast execution will be there with the guaranteed payment. I think that's a big benefit. Merchants are always looking, to make sure that the money is there or will come as part of the transaction. The immediate feedback on the accept or decline from the payer, I think it's a benefit, and maybe avoiding some of those convoluted chargeback processes and stuff. I think, I mentioned SMEs. I think SME merchants may use it quite well. If you don't have a sophisticated system, you gave the example of the market stall. I think those could be interesting cases. I mentioned omnichannel, so I'm not going to cover that anymore. What I really think is an exciting one is that even if a consumer is not yet enrolled by his issuer in this capability, there's a one-off guest mode, so to say. So that means that a SRTP can be initiated, and then the enrollment happens as part of the transaction, so to say. I hope I'm saying that right. Interrupt me if I'm wrong. And I think I heard one other one earlier in a session, that the access to SRTP for non-PSPs is something that merchants should consider. In your web store, in your mobile app, it's easy to integrate such service and make sure that the customer stays in your store, your virtual store, so to say. Moving then over maybe to the next one. So some of the use cases I've tried to list here. The one I just mentioned around the enrollment and activation, if it's nicely integrated into the customer journey, then the enrollment of the consumer can be done almost smoothly as part of setting up your customer account. E-invoicing was mentioned. I see this as a quite strong use case, where there's a QR code on the invoice or a clickable link that immediately opens that kind of dialogue. I've seen examples from personal experience. I got a German invoice. It was for a traffic fine, by the way, with a QR code. I could scan it with my Dutch mobile banking app, and the payment was made to the German authority. So it's a very simple use case, but it's so much convenience, so much ease of use. I really liked it, although it was a traffic fine. On the QR code integration, I think we talked about it, but I think it's important to make the difference between the consumer presented and merchant presented. I think either you, Alain, or Gareth referred to it. The strong point is that the consumer needs to confirm through his own device or through the merchant presented QR code. So it's not a one-sided thing where a pool payment can happen without the customer's okay, so to say. Replacing direct debit, maybe more in the B2B area, or the sorry, I don't say that correctly, in the B2C area where there is a delivery and then a direct debit. So this could be another way of pulling those payments in. Moving on. The card failure conversation, or maybe the other one here, somebody left their wallet at home but did bring their mobile phone without Apple Pay, so to say. In those cases, SRTP can work. Still able to initiate a transaction. And of course, the customer needs a device or a way to confirm it, to approve it. But I think, as a fallback kind of scenario, SRTP could actually help there. We already talked about future dated. And I saw, accept now, pay later kind of scenarios, goods on delivery, or accept later, pay now, the reverse, so to say, would also work. And coming from an oil company myself, the pre-authorization scenario or use case is quite important, before you start fueling your car or charging your electric vehicle, or getting, meat or vegetables in the supermarket. You don't know exactly how much it will be. So through a pre-authorization journey, you can do this, and then the final amount get charged later on, so to say. All right, I see some questions coming in, but Alain, I'll leave it for you to interrupt me, because I'm not going to read while I'm speaking, or raise your hand.
Please continue. I will deal with that.
Great. So some next steps then. I think I want to really call on the PSPs here on the phone on the webinar today to adopt the scheme. Otherwise, it will be, not as widespread, as widely adopted, and that everybody is looking for, that it work. And that also means, the PSPs then need to actively enroll merchants and consumers in it. And the suggestion would be to, if you start offering opening bank accounts for consumers, or probably already have bank accounts, some active campaigning, bring it in the bank account package, so to say, because only then, at the moment it's actually needed, then all those preparatory steps have already been completed, so to say. I think there's an action that we can take jointly, merchants and PSPs, on activating and promoting and using the scheme. I think the motivation, the balance between customer experience and cost that I made earlier, actually works in everybody's favor here. And I think it's important, the PSPs and merchants may be ready, but those technology providers that would actually make it happen need to make sure it is in their roadmap. If the PSPs have adopted it, and the merchants are enrolled and the consumers are enrolled, but the technology layer is still not there because it's planned for 26 or 27, then that will, make it a very difficult situation. So that will be my call for, the webinar today, and hopefully we can jointly make it a success. I think the last one is simply opening for any spontaneous question. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm also impressed by all the use case we have imagined, much more than what we had in mind. But that's the way it should be. We have built a tool, and please use it correctly. Of course, you have some rules. That's what the rule book is for. You have some rules to use the tool correctly. But of course, you have many ways to use it, and thank you for that. Just a word on the guest service. There's been a lot of ink on the guest service. And of course, you're right. The guest service is there to help with the chicken and egg issue, because of course there is always two-sided in this for corner scheme. There is the payer and the payee, and the payee might not be interesting as long as you don't have payers, and vice versa. So to cut that out, we say, okay, there is a guest mode. Let's give it to the payee, and if the payer doesn't have it, you can use a fallback mode. But of course, the fallback mode has an inconvenience. It doesn't bring all the features. So if you want all the features, you have to understand that it is also a payer scheme, not always a merchant scheme where you go to see the merchant and sell it something. It's also very important to understand it is a payer scheme, and it gives a lot of advantage to the payer, security, etc. I have explained. So yeah, thank you for that, and for mentioning the guest, which is a bit here. So we have a session of questions in the end, so please continue with sending your question in writing, and we will have them in the end. I will just take one that popped out here. Is how many participants do we have in the SRTP scheme? Currently, the response is 3, and we are very glad to 3 and 1 RTSP. So you can, it's public on the EPC website, and that makes a good transition to welcome Xavier and CaixaBank, who is a major bank in Europe that is in the scheme, to speak and how he intends to use the scheme and why he went into the scheme. So Xavier, the floor is yours as a major bank being onboarded on the scheme.
Thank you, Alain. Thank you very much to the EPC for inviting me to have this conversation. And thank you, Gareth, Alain, and Atse for setting so well the scene, for permitting me going straight to the point. Yes, as you said, Alain, we are the first bank to be homologated as provider to the request-to-pay services. But I must tell that this has never been the goal. We just hear about casualty because no others have joined previously. And why is that? Maybe because we cannot forget that we are a company of services. And our aim is providing the best possible services to our customers. And from the very beginning of the works of the EPC Request-to-Pay Task Force, we initiated a conversation with our customers. We have been interviewed with more than 600 companies, being the merchant, SMEs, or corporates, asking them about how did they think about the services that could be provided on top of Request-to-Pay, because we can not forget that Request-to-Pay is just a messaging layer. But what is important is what you put in top of this. And thinking with them, and all together with our commercial teams, we've identified some potential cases that could be of use, and they're of the interest. We've thoroughly analyzed them and thought that there were possibilities to deploy them based on Request-to-Pay. When doing this, we've noticed that there were some possibilities to deploy services on a, I would say, community space, some that had sense just locally, some that had sense pan-European, and some that had sense just by ourselves. And the very first use case that we decided was having conversation with other banks and also with Iberpay, which is going to be our service provider, our connectivity service provider. It's going to link all the banks. Was obviously, as it could not be different, a service that all banks in Spain could benefit from at different stages of deployment and whatever, with some specific calendar to get all of them on board with the first one. But there are some others that are working on this on different stages. Some are going to join in November, some on the first quarter of 2024, but at the end of 2024, all or almost all the banks are going to be there. So this has been the first use case, and we thought it was important to have all the community in there because we think that as it happens, instant payments, reachability is important. Moreover, because open banking has not been very explored yet. Obviously, potentially a single provider could fit all the market, but as we think that we are far from there, we thought that it was important. So we participated on this. We are also participating on an initiative from EBA Clearing, which goes about invoicing B2B at the pan-European space, which we think has sense to be deployed at pan-European level, maybe not as much in Spain only, but there are some cases like the ones we are exploring with local authorities for the getting the payment of taxes or whatever. They have been deployed at local space in case they are deployed. But we've perceived a lot of interest from companies, from local authorities, from everywhere, but we have to prioritize, obviously, also the merchant space and whatever. And the use case we've decided to go on first is the recovery of unsettled direct debits. That has been decided by the Spanish banking community because we thought there was a need. That I repeat, it was expressed by many contacts with different companies, corporates or whatever. As a matter of fact, Iberpay and CaixaBank made a joint press note last week, and from this we have received the interest of many corporates wanting to join us. Obviously, there are initial conversations to join. The service is about to be launched in a couple of weeks, only by CaixaBank by now. But as I said, they are going to join many banks. But this is the thing. The service, obviously, it has common features, but as it has to happen with a layer of service, every bank can provide the service they want to. Some may offer financing. Some may offer doing this automatically. Some others by batch. It doesn't matter. But the thing is that they have common features because we want everybody to play the same game. That means that when it will be based on accept later, pay now, because if somebody receives a request to pay at 5 a.m., they will not be able to see it because maybe they are sleeping or whatever. It's not the case that the one that receives a request to pay is actively doing selling, buying something at that moment. So that's why we decided to leave some ways to accept, maybe 10, maybe 15, whatever the sender of request to pay wishes. That will be the thing. That will be accept later. And we also thought that it was important that confirmation or acceptance meant something. So it's going to be linked with a payment. So no message of positive confirmation is going to be sent if the payment is not being effected. Because if we want request to pay to be accepted or to be extended, it has to be something. Because it could, I think it could potentially be the case that everybody accepts this and nobody pays. We don't want this. We want that in this use case, and obviously in the future to come, which will be, the payment it's useful both for payees and also for payers. And that's why we also decided that the only way to pay it was SETINs. Coming back to the question they posed previously, obviously it could be potentially be SET, but as far as 99 and something of the payment accounts in Spain have access to instant payments, we decided that this would be the way, because we want speed, and we want to comply, and we want to provide with a better service to our customers. That's why we use, because we joined this, because our commercial people decided this to be so. I'm from the operational side. I just do whatever they want. And it was just the first one, because they're thinking a lot of questions. They are talking about lots of people. We can assure you that local authorities are very interested, companies are very interested on the B2B, but obviously we have to begin with something, and we have to begin that, as I said before, with something that most of, I would say, payment accounts by customers, because we cannot strictly talk about payment accounts, but reachable customers would have access to it. And that's the main reason we joined this, for improving the service we do. Obviously, there will be more cases going on, a point of interaction, a physical point of sale, but generally speaking, for the conversation we had, merchants do not express their need to join a new way of payment. They feel quite comfortable with what they have. Obviously, they will consider new means of payment. The more they have, the more possibilities they have to sell, which is important. But I'm just talking about the priorities we've perceived. That doesn't mean that we are not going to address this, but we cannot address everything at the same time. So let's begin with this. Maybe let's continue with local payments. Let's go to B2B on invoicing, which we really have a strong requirements to go on, and then we'll see where it takes us.
Xavier, I will not say I'm impressed you understand how the scheme works, because you are working with us, but I'm glad you are the first one, and it was already publicly announced at the task force that the Spanish banking community would be interested. So it's not a surprise that you are here and that your colleagues will join shortly, I hope, on the scheme. And there was also expressions of interest for the Nordic communities, and then we worked a lot with them for the multi-currency, and they are also very interested. Also, they didn't say at what time they will enter, but they are probably also very interested in the scheme. So thank you for all your explanation, Xavier. And indeed, we have some questions. So there is one that is easy that came twice. It is about the SRTP and the e-invoice. Of course, they can be used jointly. And what we can do with SRTP is send the invoice as an attachment or as a link, if you like. So that's something that is indeed possible. And of course, you have to look at what each country is doing, because there are in some countries, there are some invoicing platforms that become mandatory. So of course, you have to look into that if it fits together, but it should normally go that. So there was another question for installment SRTP message. Should the payer accept all the installments or only one single SRTP? No, there is only a single SRTP with all the installments. It's not a multiple, because of course you could send multiple SRTP with each installment. That's a possibility, but that's we guess it would not be a good customer journey. So the installment as it is designed today, it is one SRTP with all the installments in it, and you accept all at once. So that's how it is designed today.
Alain,
yeah.
Alain, here. So linked to that question you just answered, there was a question for me around subscription. So
yeah,
would it
I was going, yeah. So can you read it and respond to it?
Well, I was puzzling in my mind how that would work, but I think you gave at least, part of the answer. So the question is, do you see a use case for subscription merchants? So I think I mentioned the future dated, SRTPs that you can schedule. And I think your answer a minute ago around, installments and how that would work, either in one or in multiple messages, is the answer here. But I'm not sure, you need to help me here, Alain, whether there's a recurring kind of functionality from memory. I don't think there is currently.
No, there's not currently, no. You can do a change request if you need it, but there's currently, it's only a given number of installments. It cannot be a standing order or forever. So it's just installments. Of course, it can be installment every month for 12 months, but it has to be a limited series.
All right.
So of course, if you have a subscription for 1 year, you would have to renew the subscription every year with a new request to pay. It cannot be infinite at the moment. Okay, so but that is we are open to change requests, and the change request window is open. So if you think it is needed, please send the change request, and we will look into it. Obviously. So then the next question is, what is the role of the OSN? So that someone read in very much details what we are doing. That's a very tricky question. OSN is Operational Scheme Manager. So as you might know, today the EPC is the scheme editor. So the EPC is a secretariat that works with banks and non-banks on some schemes, and that is providing rule books and providing implementation guidelines, RMA, and all this kind of thing, and is only an administrative role of onboarding participants to a scheme. But that's it, and it stops here. At the moment, the EPC doesn't have an operational role in the scheme. Operational being, for example, how to route a request, because there is first question, if I send you, if you are a participant, if you are on the payee side and you want to send your request to pay to the payer, the first question is, where do I send it? Do I have I heard there is an API. What is the endpoint of the API? Where is it? And that is an operational role, what we call operational role. So today the EPC doesn't do that, but we thought that with API schemes like SRTP and SPA that you might have heard also, now there are some APIs, and so this role is needed. So we have, and the basic thing would be in front of the participant to have the endpoint of the API, because you have to send this request to pay somewhere. So you have to call the API and to know where it is. So that's the first example, but you have other example like what are the options taken by the participant, because there are many options you can take or not in the scheme. And it's interesting to know which option you can use with this participant. So that is an operational role, which is when you run things, you want to have that live and use it. So at the moment, we have done, the EPC have done a RFI to see if there was an interest in the market for the EPC doing this role. And since there was an interest to the market, it's on the phase of doing an RFP for this role. Because obviously the EPC is not going to do it itself, it's going to have someone doing it. Like the homologation is not done directly by the EPC, but with a partner, which is Galit in this case. So the OSM will be interested to someone, and obviously will not be mandatory, because if you don't want to use this OSM, which obviously it's operational, so it will have a cost, because you have to pay for the machines, for the programs, for the people taking care of the machines. So if you think this cost is too expensive and it doesn't serve you well, you can use your own, obviously. But EPC will provide that. So since I see no more question, I want to do a final thank to all our panelists. So thank Gareth, thank Katze, and thanks Xavier for your participation here. And I think that's the end word for this webinar. And thanks all the audience. I think there was a lot of audience live, and you will have the replay link, so you can give it to your colleagues if you think they can be interested in or what we do here with the request to pay. Thanks you all, and goodbye.